안녕하세요. 2025 다빈치 모텔 스토리지에 오신 걸 환영합니다. 저는 여러분의 컨시어지 이승국입니다. 반갑습니다. 반갑습니다. 지금 밖에 비 오기 시작했나요? 안전한 곳에 오신 거 다시 한번 환영합니다. 컨시어지는 아시는 분들은 아시겠지만 중세시대 성 안에 있는 초를 관리하던 사람이었습니다. 오늘 이곳에서 벌어지는 또 연사님들의 여러 말씀들이 여러분에게 영감의 빛이 되길 바라는 마음에서 저도 제 몫을 최선을 다해서 하도록 하겠습니다. 많은 분들이 제 눈에 보이는데 정말 뜬금없는 질문 하나만 드릴게요. 나 게임 좋아한다 하는 분 어느 정도 계신가요? 게임을 나는 좀 즐긴다. 계셨고요. 알겠습니다. 제가 또 어느 정도 어떤 분들이 오시는지 알아야 제가 진행을 할 수 있어서 제가 할 말과는 좀 동떨어져 있을 수 있지만 나중에 들으시면 그래서 물어봤나 하실 것 같아요. 이번 다빈치 모텔의 가장 큰 화두 중에 하나는 AI입니다. 사실 이번 다빈치 모텔뿐만이 아니라 우리 삶에 AI가 너무 강하게 들어와 있죠. 한 1, 2년 전만 해도 그게 전문가들의 영역인 줄 알았는데 이제는 우리 삶에 너무 깊숙이 들어와서 조금만 기계 다룰 줄 알고 조금 인터넷 한다 하시는 분들도 제미나이가 좋냐 챗GPT가 좋냐 논할 수 있을 정도로 너무 깊숙하게 우리 삶에 AI가 들어와 있죠. 그래서 한 가지 더 질문을 드리고 싶어요. AI는 우리를 대체하는 존재가 될까요? 우리를 확장시켜주는 존재가 될까요? 실시간 설문조사 해볼까요? AI는 우리를 대체하고야 말 것이다. 얼마나 계신가요? 몇 분 계시고요. 어느 정도 지금 확인했습니다. 아니다. AI는 우리 인간이라는 존재를 확장시켜줄 존재라고 난 생각한다. 어느 정도 계실까요? 상당수가 AI가 우리에게 긍정적인 미래를 가져다 줄 것이다. 여기 계신 소수파는 조금 어두운 마음을 갖고 계시지만 이건 우리의 각자 생각이 다른 거니까요. 이 부분에 대해서 사실 저도 조금 고민을 해봤는데 쉽게 답이 내려지지 않더라고요. 조금 나는 대체될 것 같아 라고 하는 분도 너무 이해가 되고요. 아니 우리를 확장시켜 줄 거야. 장밋빛 미래도 너무 이해가 되고요. 그리고 이 부분에 관해서 누구보다 깊은 고민을 많이 하신 분이 있을 것 같아요. AI 산업의 최전선에서 선구자로서 이 일을 하시면서 이분은 AI와 인간 대체냐 확장이냐를 놓고서 과연 우리는 그것보다 더 나가서 상호작용할 수 있을까? 공존할 수 있을까? 이 주제를 끊임없이 연구하고 고민하시는 분입니다. 지금부터 여러분은 AI 산업 최전선에 계신 분의 굉장히 특별한 고백을 듣게 될 겁니다. AI에게 인간을 가르치며 얻게 된 통찰력을 여러분께 조금씩 들려주실 예정이라고 합니다. 소니 AI 기술을 이끌고 있는 선구자 마이클 스프랑거와 함께 AI로 확장하는 휴먼 크리에이티브 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 무대에 오르실 때 큰 박수 부탁드릴게요. Please welcome to the stage Michael Spranger.
Hello, thanks for coming. My name is Michael Spranger. I've been with Sony for almost 20 years now in many different roles, from research to product development. And then very recently, not so recent actually, 5 years ago, we had a chance to start this new organization, which is called Sony AI. And the mission of this organization is to unleash human imagination and creativity with AI. And today I want to tell you a little bit about what that organization is doing and how we're enabling AI for creators. And I'll tell you one big story about how we work with gaming creators. Okay, this is not working. There you go. Okay, first success. So the first thing I want to tell you about is Sony, so that you can a little bit see the context of Sony AI's work within this very large company called Sony, which has about 120,000 employees. And so many of you might think of Sony as an electronics company, because 20 years ago, 90% of the revenue was actually from electronics, like TVs and all the different things that you might know. But today, actually, the company is really an entertainment company. The biggest business unit by revenue is actually PlayStation, which houses not only the PlayStation platform, so the thing that you can buy in the store, but it also has about 19 game studios developing exclusive content for that platform. Now, the founders of Sony were really visionary. They actually started in the 80s and 90s to heavily invest and merge and acquire entertainment companies. And that's where Sony Music and Sony Pictures are coming from. Sony Music today is the largest music publisher in the world. So we have many artists that are publishing through Sony, for instance, Beyoncé. Sony Pictures is also really iconic. So you may know Columbia Pictures, right? So many of the movies that we watch today on planes or at home or on our phones are actually from Sony Pictures. And so those areas together, 60% of the revenue of Sony today. So a huge transformation of the company from electronics to entertainment. And of course, we still have electronics, so that's like the audio equipment, the cameras, the TVs, and so on, but it's a much smaller part than it was 20 years ago. And then there are some other parts of the company which are also very, very interesting. For instance, the one that's on the right side there, imaging and sensing. Sony is the largest CMOS image sensor producer in the world. So your smartphones may actually have 60% chance that they have a Sony sensor in them. By the way, number 2 is Samsung. There you go. And then we have financial services, a bank and an insurance company, but they're actually being spun out. And so the reason I'm telling you about this is because in the company we have a lot of creators. We have engineers, we have electronics creators, we have chip designers, but we work extremely closely with movie directors, with musicians, and also with game directors. And this is kind of where Sony AI is coming from. We're happily engaged with creators and trying to provide a technology to them to fulfill their dreams. And so this is, on the left side, you see the projects that we're engaged in, so the project area. So we have a very strong team on gaming and interactive agents. And the majority of this presentation is actually going to be about that. But we also work on generative AI for creators. So music generative AI, sound, 3D, how to create worlds. And then maybe I'll touch a little bit up on that. And then we have very strong projects on imaging and sensing where we help the designers of chips like design the next generation of image sensors using AI. So simulating chips, verifying chips, but also designing the actual hardware using AI in a much better way than we were ever able to do before. And then we have a few projects which I'm not going to talk about today because they're not quite public yet. Hopefully they will become public this year in robotics and also in scientific discovery. And again, these are all projects focusing on helping scientists, for instance, in the case of scientific discovery, to make the next invention using AI. And everything we do at the center of it has AI ethics. And that's a very strong core of what we believe AI has to be developed like or with, because we are working so closely with creators and we are so close to people with our image sensors. We have the strong belief that it's important to develop this technology responsibly. And we have a very strong AI ethics team which was actually going to have a public breakthrough, I think, in next month or the month after. And so we're sort of distinguishing ourselves a lot by having this creator-centric technology and really focusing on our mission, which is to unleash human imagination and creativity with AI, right? So the goal here is that AI is an enabler, is an augmenter, is a helper, and it's not a replacing the creators, because I don't think that's actually what we want. Now, the story I'm going to tell you about today in much more detail is about Gran Turismo. And Gran Turismo is almost, by now, a 30-year game on PlayStation platform. It's PlayStation exclusive, has always been PlayStation exclusive. It's created by a company called Polyphony Digital, which is a part of Sony PlayStation since the very beginning. And it is a real racing simulator, actually. And it's been created by Yamauchi-san, who you're actually going to see also today talk in one of the videos that I have. And he really wanted to recreate that racing culture, that sensation of racing. And so this is not Demolition Derby. This is really about fair but aggressive racing. It's about the competition and very, very realistic competition, similar to what you might find in the real world. Now, on this slide, I'm explaining to you a few things that we did with Gran Turismo. So on the right side, you can see the Gran Turismo movie poster, which I think was a movie in 2023 or 2024, which details the story of a kid from the UK called John Mardenborough. And by the way, John Mardenborough is the guy in the middle there next to me. I met him in Saudi Arabia last year. And when he was a teenager, he was learning to drive in Gran Turismo. So he didn't have a driver's license yet, but he was a really good racer in Gran Turismo. And he was selected to become a real-world racing driver. And within 3 months of joining the Nissan Racing Academy, he actually became a competitive racing driver. And he was competing against people who were in cars and real racing drivers for a very, very long time. And the reason I'm telling the story is because it's so interesting for us. We have the game. We have obviously produced that movie with Sony Pictures. But also that movie was shot using a very special camera that can be mounted within racing cars to really capture the sensation of people in actual racing cars in the real world, to kind of get that sensation across to the audience using Sony equipment, Sony cameras. And then finally, and that's the story I want to tell you today about, is we used Gran Turismo Sophie to build a racing AI that really, I think, and also in the eyes of Yamauchi-san, the creator of the game, really pushes the state of the art of racing to the next level. And that racing agent, that racing AI, is called Gran Turismo Sophie. So I'll talk a lot about Gran Turismo Sophie in the next 20 minutes or so. And it's such a big success in terms of not just for the game itself, but also in terms of the underlying AI technology that what we developed made it on the cover of Nature, which is one of the biggest publications and one of the biggest accolades that AI researchers can actually have. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell for Gran Turismo Sophie, and it made it on the cover of Nature. So just to tell you, it's a really big thing from an AI perspective, but also from a racing and also from a gaming perspective. And in order to introduce it, I'll show a quick video.
There's very few places where you can go out and say, I'm going to build an AI and I'm going to make it truly superhuman.
We're going to create artificial intelligence that will unleash the power of the human creativity and imagination.
Gran Turismo Sophie is a super exciting project. It's an amazing AI research and development activity.
There are many racing games where the physics is half done, but in Gran Turismo, that racing sensation that the players get, that's really at the core of the game.
このなんか車文化、車という存在をもう丸ごとビデオゲームの中にこう再現したいなと思ったんですね。
Because of the realism of the game, it is actually very difficult to program agents.
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what things we needed to change in order to get that superhuman performance.
Why are we building this GT Sophie agent?
This is not just a technical breakthrough project. It really is about bringing AI into the hands of the game developers who are going to build the new experiences for the players.
本当にすごいアグレッシブで、これからもっと一緒にレースをしていきたいなっていうふうに思いましたね。
All right, and now I'm going to explain this to you in a bit more detail. So the first point I want to make is, why is this an important breakthrough from an AI perspective? And I already mentioned that, but the game is really realistic, right? And somebody training in the game and going to the real world in 3 months, that's a really important achievement, and it shows how real the game is. And the agent, the AI, has to learn in the first step to master these complex physics of the racing car, right? And the racing car on the track and taking the curves and being really, really fast. The second big aspect is tactics. So you can train an AI to be very, very fast on the track, but then ultimately it will have to race against people or other AIs. And that means that there's an interaction happening. And that interaction changes the physics of the car again, right? So if you're behind the car, you get something called slipstream, which changes your total top speed, but also your braking kind of behavior. And of course, if you're trying to overtake somebody, that person in racing scenarios is going to try to prevent that. So it's going to make a move against and try to close, for instance, an open area where you wanted to overtake. So the agent has to learn to interact and be competitive. And then the last point, why it's such an important breakthrough, is sports etiquette. And maybe you know there are many AI breakthroughs in games before this happened. And one of the key things that I'm sure maybe you've heard is AlphaGo, which was able to beat Lee Sedol in the game Go, which obviously is very, very strong in Korea and in Asia more generally. In that game, there's nothing like sports etiquette, right? Because the agent can only make legal moves. But in racing, you can actually hit another car. And in the real world, somebody may get hurt or may die. But also in simulation, we don't want this agent just to drive into other cars and just kind of bump around. And so it has to be careful. But at the same time, the agent wants to win, so it has to drive aggressively. And so that careful balance of being aggressive enough in order to race and win, but at the same time play fairly or race fairly, it's something that the agent also had to learn. Like, we cannot program that in because these are very kind of rules that are not that clearly defined, actually. And then there's stewards who are, in a race looking at a particular incident and then potentially giving you a penalty. Just to reiterate the point on physical realism, you can see on the top that's actually out of the game, and below is somebody driving a real race car on the same track, which is Laguna Seca. It's a track in California. The car in the game and the real race car is tuned with exactly the same parameters, suspension, motor settings, and so on. And then the time that the same driver takes in simulation as well as in the real world is basically the same. Okay? And that tells you something about the realism of the game. How real is that game? Now, how did we do it? Okay. We trained this AI agent, or this AI, purely by letting it play the game by itself. And this is a technique, it's called reinforcement learning. It's actually been used also in the Go success. And it's a very simple technique from a schematic point of view, from an abstract point of view. Basically, Gran Turismo Sophie, the name of that AI agent, is just playing the game. And it can take certain actions, right? And it's a racing game, so it can do acceleration, it can brake. That has an impact on the game. In this game, this particular version we use is GT Sport. And then the agent gets back, the AI gets back a state. Roughly, where is the car, where are the other cars? Very, very similar to what you might find on an autonomous vehicle. And we've, by the way, also shown this with other state information like vision. And then the important thing that we tell the agent is how well is it doing. So we're not telling it what it has to do, only if it does something, how well is it doing. And of course, in racing, if you're fast, if you go through the track very, very quickly, if you're overtaking other racers, that's a good thing. If you crash in other cars, that's a bad thing. So that's really that's the only information that the AI has. And then they retrain the neural network to become better and better over time. Now, it's important that this agent gets many, many experiences from the game. And so we used PlayStation clusters that are distributed across the world. And they're used by actual gamers, but as you may know, gamers actually only play from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., so there's a lot of what we call dark time on these servers. And then we use those servers to train our AI agent to get as many, many experiences in the game as possible, and so that the agent can learn this task, which is to race and race successfully. And that's been a great collaboration between us, the game studio, but also the PlayStation platform, who helped us with this technology. And so it's kind of showing you a little bit how that agent learns. So after 15 minutes of experiences, the agent sort of gets around the track. It's a little bumpy. It's not very, very fast. Top right, after 4 hours, already looks a little bit better. And then after 8 hours, we're starting to see real racing lines. It takes about 24 hours to become better than about 80% of the drivers. So this is a graph showing all the performances of humans on this particular track. And as you can see, after 24 hours, the track time that GT Sophie has is about 118 seconds. And then all the people to the left are the people who are really, really, really good. And of course, that's very, very few people. And so it takes then actually up to a week of training for this agent to become superhuman, to become better than the best human athletes. And this is showing you a video of what this agent is learning. And so this is the agent driving the car after about a week or so. And what is going to come up here is something called the chicane of death, which is a chicane where many people have crashed into the wall. And you're going to see, I think, very clearly how amazing this agent has to learn to drive. Okay? Did you see that? Super close to the wall. And actually, humans cannot do that because humans have much more variability in their performance. And so even the best drivers in this particular corner are going to leave a lot more space. And so it's going to come up once again. So pay attention. There you go. Okay, so no human can do that. It's already superhuman. Now, as I mentioned, we raced against some of the best drivers in the world. So there are 4 of the really top esports athletes in Gran Turismo. So these are all kids, of course, somewhere between 12 and 16, because they need the reaction time, like real athletes actually. And they're very serious about this game. So they train 6 to 8 hours every day. They participate in real competitions across the world, racing against each other. And we tested our agent against those best drivers in the world. And we did that on 3 different car track combinations in order to show that our agent doesn't just learn to master one track or one car, but many car track combinations. So the left one is a very fast track, relatively standard, almost road car. Middle one already going much more into the racing world. And then the right one, that's a very famous racing track, which is recreated in the game. Is a track called Circuit de la Sarthe in France, which is used for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And that car is really difficult to drive. It's a concept car developed together with car manufacturers for this game only. And it's very, very subtle, so I cannot drive that car. And of course, I wouldn't tell you this story if we didn't win, at some point. But we did have a race day, actually, where we did lose. So the first race day, the humans, won. They had more points in racing as we had. But then our team, the engineers and the researchers got back together, and they said, okay, we're going to try and be better than the humans. And then we had a second race day with some improved algorithms and more training. And then we basically were really, really superhuman, very, very strong against these really, really good GT drivers. And here's an example from what sort of happens in these races. And one of those cars is driven by an AI, and the other car is driven by a human. And I kind of challenge you to see or try to guess which of the cars is actually human versus which one is the AI. But the important piece of this here is that this is kind of what we want to see. We want to see interesting races where there's overtaking behavior, the agent is trying to race, is trying to win, being aggressive, but at the same time, also racing fairly, not just bumping into the human, leaving some space if necessary, but also really making sure that it overtakes. Here's another really great example. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you what is what. The gray car was the AI, the white car is driven by a human. Here's another example. Again, the colored cars are by AI. Oops, that's the same. Here's another example. This is actually an amazing overtaking behavior. So the white cars are from driven by humans. The green car and the gray car are AIs. And I'm going to play this again because there's a really interesting situation where you can see that the AI is trading off a position in order to have a better entry and then exit in this particular curve, which is really a highly tactical, almost strategic behavior that the agent learned. Again, without us telling it or teaching it this behavior, we only told it, it's good if you race fast, it's good if you overtake. And so that is a really interesting thing that we found here, is that these agents are actually learning to race, because in racing, you sometimes take a step back in order to have that better entry exit. And by the way, it's also a double overtake by AI against humans. Pretty cool. Now, it's cool that we win these races, but what we're really interested in is how do these professional or semi-professional esports racers, how do they see this? And on the left side, you see Miyazono-san, I think 3 times world champion. He said he completely forgot that I was playing against an AI. It was really fun. I want to race with the agents more. So that's kind of, of course, the feedback we're looking for, right? So superhuman is kind of cool for engineers and researchers, less cool for players. And so this is a really, really exciting kind of direction that they're telling us that they're using. And then on the right side, you see Emily Jones, another really important racer in this world of Gran Turismo. And she said it was really exciting to see GT Sophie's racing technique, and that she got a lot of inspiration from her from the agent. And so I'm going to play her. It was really actually, let me restart, and then hopefully we can have a bit more audio, because I think it's really interesting what she's saying, how she's learning from the AI.
It was really interesting seeing the lines where the AI would go. So there were certain corners that I was going out wide and then cutting back in, and the AI was going in the whole way around. So I learned a lot about the lines, and also knowing what to prioritize. Like the AI into turn 1, for example, I was braking later than the AI, but the AI would get a much better exit than me and beat me to the next corner. So I didn't notice that until I saw the AI, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. I should do that instead.
So this is really, really nice because we want these AIs to be inspirational, not just for the game creators, but also for the racers. And what she's describing here is, I think, is a really important thing, is like, if you are one of the top racers in the world, there are about 10 people in the world that you can actually race against that have your performance level. And there's also only 10 people that you can really learn from on how to change your own behavior, right? But we can train millions of different character AIs, like more aggressive, less aggressive, different lines. And that can really help these racers improve their own technique to become better over time and become closer to some extent to what the AI has already been achieving in terms of the speed and the race winning. So I think this is really encouraging, and that's also what we want to see, right? So Superhuman is great, but ultimately it's about people. Now, we can use the same technique, really the same technique, to train these agents or AIs to do many different things. And I'll show you one example, which I think is really exciting as well. And I'll just play the video, and it's going to be clear. So this is an AI that has learned to drift. Okay? And it's actually a kind of superhuman drifting, because no human has been able to do that before. And we're using the same techniques, the same reinforcement learning, the same infrastructure, the same architecture, the same neural network, and we train it just with a different objective or with a different reward. In this case, we're telling the agent, it's not so important how fast you are, but please use as much tire as you can, okay? And that's then the behavior that you get out of this. Now, we can do more. So the important thing is that we wanted to not just have the AI breakthrough, not just race against the best humans, but we wanted to make this technology available to as many gamers as possible. And so we did. So we put it in the game. Of course, Superhuman, racing against Superhuman is kind of boring. Basically, you see the car in front of you and kind of going away, you know, and then going further and further away. And so we created the same version of the AI, but at different difficulty levels, different aggressive versus moderation levels. And then now everybody who has Gran Turismo, the game, actually Gran Turismo 7, can race against GT Sophie in different car track combinations. There's an interaction, so we kind of show a little bit what the agent is thinking, whether it's mad or whether it's getting more excited about racing and so on. And we can also drive many other cars and tracks. And that's a really important technical breakthrough, because that agent has to run on your PlayStation at home. So it has to be very, very small in order for you to experience it. And then very recently, we actually released a new version of this where you can change the car that the agent is driving. And that's a really kind of, from a technology perspective, another major step that we took. Because if you change the suspension, if you change the engine settings, if you swap out a whole engine, that is a completely new physics. And the agent in the game is now driving cars that it has never seen before in training, right? So in training, we can only train it on a certain number of car track combinations. But now the players can change the car that the AI is driving in the game on their PlayStation. And that same agent is able to drive competitively. And so this is the very recent release of Gran Turismo, where this is now possible. And this is Gran Turismo Sophie 2.1. And it's now available in custom races, so you can choose, different track layouts, but more importantly, you can change the car that the agent is driving. And I cannot stress that enough. For us, this may seem easy, but the agent is now driving cars that it has never seen before, like it's never seen in training, and it has to do that correctly. So you can change the suspension, you can change the aero settings, you can add a spoiler, you can make the spoiler bigger, smaller, you can actually swap out engines entirely, and the agent doesn't crash, right? It's still racing successfully on all of these different combinations. And so this is really a story where we focus on how can we build the best technology for racing, how can we prove that it's superhuman by racing against the best humans in this particular sport. But we didn't just stop there. How can we bring it into the game? And it's a larger AI transformation story for gaming or for PlayStation as a whole, because now we can take that technology and we can bring it to more games. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are about 19 game studios that are part of Sony. So there's Horizon, made by Guerrilla Games. Santa Monica Studios is doing God of War. We have Spider-Man by Insomniac and many, many other titles that can benefit from this technology. And it's not just racing, right? It's like your collaborators, is the enemies that you're facing. They can be more personalized to you. They can be more interesting to you and based on your game history. And we can also bring in more helpers so that your gaming experience becomes better over time. And so we are really excited about bringing this technology from individual games like Gran Turismo to all of the games that are happening on the PlayStation platform. And at the very beginning, I started out by saying this is really about creator-driven technology. And so I don't know if you caught that, but in the video, we had Yamauchi-san talking about why he actually made that game and why he spent almost 30 years of his life on this game, making it better, making the graphics better, making the physics better, building relationships with the biggest car manufacturers in the world, like Ferrari and so on, who bring in their concept cars into this game because they so much believe into this car culture that Yamauchi-san has created for Gran Turismo. And without him, I think this project would not have happened. So he thinks of this as the AI being the future, not just of gaming, but actually the future of racing. And it goes back to the thing that I mentioned earlier, is like, we can train people to go beyond what they're capable of today using this AI. And he was a big champion for this project, and he actually had many of the ideas, how it's represented in the game, how do we race against the humans, what is the behavior of the agents of the AI that he expects. So he taught us a lot about racing and the kind of behavior that he expects in this game from the AI. And so without him, this technology, this particular way of framing the technology, building out the technology, and also deploying the technology would not have been possible. And I think that combination of really strong AI research and engineering teams, but with creative vision, I think this is the future of how this technology should evolve. If it's only engineers and researchers, the product that comes out is typically not that interesting from a consumer perspective directly. I mean, okay, you talk about ChatGPT maybe in the Q&A and so on, but from a racing perspective, right? You need to be a gamer, you need to have a vision for gaming in order to understand and build that technology in a way that makes sense for the gamers, but also for the creators of these games. And so we're really proud that we had this opportunity to work with Yamauchi-san and continuing to work with Yamauchi-san. Now, I told you one story of Sony AI. We do have many stories like that in many different areas. And on this slide, you see a few of the things that we've been working on. So maybe I'll just call out the AI for chip design. So when we say creator, we're not just thinking about game developers, but we're also thinking about chip designers because they're also creating things. They're creating chip designs. They're creating new ways of imaging and sensing in the case of Sony. And so we're building this technology with them in order to enhance their workflows, in order to enhance their capabilities and make them stronger in terms of how we, in building the next generation of chips. And then maybe I'll point out one more thing on the bottom left here, which is, since we're an entertainment company, one of the things that's really important about entertainment, I think Korea is actually a great example of this, is like, we want to bring content from any part of the world to a global audience, right? And so if you think about Squid Game, which obviously comes from Korea, it's been a huge success because of this ability to bring content from various different cultural backgrounds into the global streaming environment. And so, for instance, one of the things that one of my teams is working very heavily on is how can we build the technology to bring more content from India to the world and more content to India, for instance. Now, I did want to give you one more point, or one more project that we're working on that kind of highlights a little bit what I think is important in the development of AI. And that's in the realm of AI ethics. So I talked a lot about the creator-centric side, but if you remember, I was also talking about image sensors and how they're really close to people, right? So your smartphone, I mean, that's always with you. Maybe there's a camera somewhere, we have to make sure that this technology works for everybody. And so the AI ethics team that we have in Sony AI is really focused on how do we make sure that the technology that we build, for instance, for vision capabilities, for autonomous driving, is working for people of any background, any region. And that's a really important part of AI ethics and the development of AI. And so one of the things that we did, this is research, we designed a novel multidimensional measure of apparent skin color for fairness purposes. It's maybe a mouthful. What that really means is that we built a way to test vision systems, whether they work on people not just from Western countries, but also in Asian countries. And we developed a testing methodology. We made it public. And that testing methodology, we think, had a big impact, actually, even on big tech companies, because they had to retest all their models and make sure that their vision models work on everybody, not just people in Europe or in the United States. And so the story I was telling you today has really two parts. And the majority of what I told you about is this creator-led AI breakthroughs like GT Sophie. But I also want us to think about how we develop this technology responsibly, not just from the viewpoint of creators and gamers and so on, but also of people that are affected by this technology, like in computer vision. And that was the last example that I just showed you. And so that's it. Thanks for your attention. These are all the different things that we've been talking that I've been talking about. These are all the different areas that we're really interested in. And if you want to learn more, obviously there's a website that you can check out. Thanks very much.